All the while was thinking about that threat which her mother gave her. She knew she had to do something to give her money or else she will stop the treatment of her grandmother, who is in coma. Vine's attention was continuously going on that locker where Jungkook had put money. There was a huge amount. Vine already knew the locker code as she has seen Jungkook opening it. It was night time when Jungkook came out of the washroom after taking a bath. He went towards the mirror and started drying his hairs, but then his attention went on Vine, who was already looking at him. Jungkook what? Got tired of putting an act all day. Jungkook said sarcastically, Vine, I'm not doing any act. Vine said coldly, forgetting everything. Jungkook looked at her coldly and turned towards her and started rolling his wheelchairs. He went to her and Vine held couch tightly. Jungkook tried to sit on couch beside her, but he got slipped and in a moment of second he fell on Vine, who fell on the couch by his weight. Jungkook's whole body was pressed against her. Water droplets from his ears fall on her face. They both were looking at each other. They were so close that almost their lips were touching each other. Jungkook gulped when he saw that the drop which got dropped from his hair fall near just her lips. Jungkook looked at her lips and then in her eyes he saw nervousness, craziness, and moreover, innocence in it. Vine was holding her breath while seeing him that close. Without him knowing, Jungkook hand went towards her face and wiped the drop away. He intentionally touched the corner of her lips, making the tension rise between them. Jungkook looked at her lips and before he could do something, door got opened and his mother came inside. Mrs. John, Vine and Jun, before she could complete, she saw them in that position on the couch. Both of them turned towards her and Vine pushed Jungkook in embarrassment and he fell on floor. A groan left from his mouth, catching their attention. Mrs. John, Jungkook, are you okay? Jungkook laid at Vine and nodded his head. Vine hurriedly went to him and helped him to sit on wheelchair. Mrs. John, you brats, if you wanted to do all that, then you should have locked the door. Mrs. John said, making Vine's eyes widen and her cheeks turned red like tomato. Vine shook her head, thinking that Jungkook will also deny, but what he said next made her eyes more. Jungkook, so what? You should have knocked on the door before coming inside of a married couple room. Jungkook said, looking at Mrs. John, who smirked in response, making him come back on earth. Jungkook, we weren't doing anything, it's just I got slipped. Jungkook said, avoiding looking at them, but Mrs. John chuckled and said, I came here to call you both for dinner, saying that she turned around to leave and Vine also followed her. Jungkook cursed himself. Jungkook, what the is wrong with you, Jungkook? Don't fall for her, she is just faking it all. Jungkook changed the shirt and also went outside for dinner. Three of them were having their dinner. Mrs. John and Jungkook saw that Vine was only playing with the food while she was lost in her thoughts. Vine came back when she heard Mrs. John, Mia, it's been week after your marriage, but you haven't visited your parents. If you want tomorrow, Jungkook can drop you. Vine looked at Mrs. John. Yes, I was thinking of going there tomorrow. Mrs. John smiled and said, no worries, Jungkook will take you there. Jungkook, why are you dragging me into this? I can't. I don't want to meet them. It was okay for Ryan that Jungkook didn't want to go there or else he would have seen Mia there and things would have turned out wrong. Mrs. John kinda glared at Jungkook. He rolled his eyes and said, tomorrow I have an important mission. I can't. Mrs. John signed. Mrs. John, fine, driver will take you. Van nodded and again went in her thoughts about that money and all she had to decide is something till tomorrow. Jungkook and Vine both were done. Jungkook was going towards the room on wheelchair and Vine was following him. Mrs. John, don't forget to lock the door. Vine was embarrassed and her pink formed on her cheeks. She didn't stop but Jungkook turned and glared at her mother, making her chuckle. Next day, Vine was moving back and forth the studio. Her mother was continuously calling her to money. Jungkook was gone on a mission and he will come tomorrow. Mrs. John was also not present in the house. Vine's attention went on her phone bell. Van looked at the caller ID and it was her mother again. Van nervously picked up the call. Yes, Van's mother. Were you dead or what? I have been calling you from past 4 hours. Do you remember or not? Today you have to give me that amount. Van, I don't have money. Van said the truth, but then in return she got a scoff. Van's mother, do I look like I care? Go and arrange it. Ask your in-laws, your husband, or steal. I don't care. Just give me that amount till evening, or else handle your grandmother on your own. She cut the call and didn't listen to Vine. Vine bit her lips. She was going crazy. She knew she had to do something. Vine stopped 15 lakh. It's a huge amount. How I will arrange it? I can't ask Jungkook because he already considered me as Mia, a greedy and selfish person. Also, I can't ask for this huge amount from Auntie. What she will think about me. After thinking for a while, her attention went on the locker. She went towards the locker and with the trembling hands she dialed the passcode and in a second it got open. She looked inside and there were many bundles. She gulped and took out the money. Fine, I have to do this. I know it's wrong, but if I didn't, my grandmother will lose her life. There is no one who will take care of her. I have to do this, and after that, taking a chance, I will tell everything to Mrs. John. Vine finally made her mind and took out that amount. She put that in her bag and went outside the house and gave that money to her mother and went towards the hospital to see her grandmother. When Vine came back, Mrs. John was already there. She asked Vine where she went. Vine told her that she went to meet her parents, and Mrs. John was okay with that. But then Vine came to know that Jungkook had already arrived and he is inside the room. Vine was shocked and became scared that what if Jungkook had known about that missing money. Vine was getting scared a lot, but in a nanosecond, door got opened and an angry Jungkook came inside. Vine looked at his direction and saw him coming on wheelchair. His hand was covered with bandage. Jungkook was glaring at Vine, making her tremble in fear. Mrs. John looked at Jungkook and said, Jungkook, what happened? Jungkook ignored Mrs. John and rolled his chair towards Vine. His expression was showing that he knew everything, but the truth is he didn't know the full truth. Jungkook reached there and said, I will ask first and last time. Did you took the money? Jungkook said in his deep husky voice, and Vine knew she messed up and now there was no way to escape. She was trembling inside but didn't say anything. Mrs. John, what are you saying, Jungkook? Jungkook ignored his mother again. Jungkook gritted his teeth. He wasn't getting any response. He held Vine's hand tightly and shook her, giving her pain. Jungkook, Mia, I am asking you something. Tears came inside her eyes, but she didn't say anything because how will she confess that yes, she did? Mrs. John tried to remove Jungkook's hand. Mrs. John, Jungkook, what are you doing? Leave her. Jungkook shot a glare at his mother but didn't leave her hand. In fact, he tightened his grip, making Vine hiss in pain. Jungkook, not this time, mother. You can't save her like that. Look at her. Her real face. She took my money and that's stealing. Vine gulped the crying emotion which was gathered inside her. Mrs. John looked at Vine and then she again tried to remove Jungkook's hand in which she got successful. Mrs. John, behave, Jungkook. She is your wife. How can you say that to her? She can never do that. Vine looked at Mrs. John and fell in more guilt at how she was taking her side and the truth. When she will came to know about the truth, she will broke down and will never trust her again. Jungkook, I am stating the fact. She took the money. The amount is missing from the locker. I know it's her. Mrs. John, there are many people in the house, maids, guards. Anyone can do that. Stop blaming her. All the time Vine was silent, she crying silently. Jungkook, come on, mom, she has blinded you with her all innocent act. You are not listening to your own child. Don't worry. I will find out the truth and will uncover her fake innocent face. She is making us fool, but I don't believe her. I told you before, she and her parents are gold digger. Mrs. John scolded Jungkook and sent him away. He was trying to kill Vine, but Mrs. John didn't let him do anything. Mrs. John looked at Vine, who was crying silently, and in a sudden, Vine hugged Mrs. John. Mrs. John made her sit on couch and hugged her back. Vine was feeling a mother love which she never got before. Mrs. John wanted to talk to Vine because she sensed that something was strange, but she didn't. She gave her time to calm. Jungkook hate for Wine was growing up. He didn't let Wine come near him whenever he needs help. Wine tried to help him, but he scolded her badly. 2 days were past more. Mrs. John was doubting something but was observing everything. Here, on the other hand, Jungkook was heading towards his base for the mafia meeting. His car stopped on the signal. All the time he was only thinking about Wine and that stealing matter. He knew this was done by her, but still his mother was trusting her and he didn't know why. Jungkook looked outside the window, but then his attention caught something. He saw Wine sitting inside the cafe with a boy. He frowned and looked clearly. It was Wine who was there. He asked the driver to park the car outside, and then his assistant also saw that where he was looking. Assistant, sir, isn't it Mia, ma'am? Jungkook didn't say anything. He was only looking at her. She was changed. Her dressing was kind of vulgar, and she was looking like a bold one, not like his wife. Well, the answer to this question was that she was Wine's twin sister, Mia. She was the actual Mia who was inside the cafe and Wine was at home. But he was thanking her as his wife assistant. Sir, he is the same guy about whom I told you. He is the boyfriend of Mia's man. Jungkook was darkened with the thought of his wife cheating on him. Jungkook thought, looking at that shameless girl. At home, she is making my mother a fool, and here she is enjoying with her boyfriend. She told my mother that she is going at her parents' place, but who knew that she was lying to her? But today I will uncover your two face in front of her, Mia. Jungkook took Mia's photo with that guy and smirked and said, "Today will be your last day in my house and in this world." Saying that, Jungkook took a last glance at her and made a fist. He signaled the driver and they went away. Who knew that once again it was Vine who will suffer? On the other hand, Vine came back home and went inside the room. She went out to meet her grandmother, well, more specifically to see her as she is in coma. Vine was in guilt of stealing and lying. Today, she had decided to somehow tell the truth and face the situation. She knew she had broken their trust and they won't forgive her. Or maybe they will throw her out of the house, but she was only worried about her grandmother. If her parents came to know about the truth that Vine told everything, then they will stop her grandmother's treatment. Vine was in her thoughts when Mrs. John came inside. Vine looked at her. "Mrs. John, Mia, if you have time, can we talk?" Vine frowned but nodded her head and said, "Yeah, sure." Mrs. John went towards her and sat on the bed beside her. Mrs. John was finding words, but then she took a deep breath and said, "Mrs. John, yeah, I wanted to talk about the money which got stolen 2 days before." Vine became nervous and looked at her. Mrs. John saw the change in her expression. She was waiting for her to say something. Vine knew it was time to say the truth, or one lie will lead to another. Vine was nervously playing with her fingers. Mrs. John out her hand in her shoulder, making her stop. "Mrs. John, tell me what it is," she said calmly. Vine took a deep breath and opened her mouth to say something, but